Biden leads a new drive to cement the West-Ukraine war effort against Putin and Trump. President Joe Biden speaks at the state dinner held in his honor at the Elysee Palace in Paris, France, June 8, 2024. Washington CNN. President Joe Biden is leading the world's richest democracies in sending a beefed up message to Russian President Vladimir Putin that the West will not forsake Ukraine despite the political shocks casting doubt over its commitment. Biden met Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Italy on the sidelines of the G7 summit Thursday, aiming to personally reinforce the promise he spelled out last week on Normandy battlefield, where fascism began to crack 80 years ago. We will not walk away, because if we do, Ukraine will be subjugated, and we will not end there, Biden said, surrounded by the last surviving U.S. veterans of the D-Day and the graves of the more than 9,000 of their fallen comrades. Ukraine's neighbors will be threatened. All of Europe will be threatened. The autocrats of the world are watching closely to see what happened in Ukraine. Yet Biden's undertaking will come up against the growing concerns in Europe that he will merely be an interregnum between two Donald Trump administrations. The ex-president term that ended in 2021 shattered decades-old certainties that the United States will be a stabilizing force in transatlantic affairs and will always secure Europe's security. And the autocrats of the world, name checked by the Biden, will no doubt to be watching on Thursday when Trump demonstrates his luck on the Republican Party by meeting GOP House members and senators on Capitol Hill. The show of authority will take place 2 weeks after Trump became the first former president to be convicted of the crime, and less than 5 months before the presumptive Republican nominee will ask the voters to return him to the White House. Biden gives a warning about democracy during the Day 80 anniversary speech. Biden's emotional, political, and diplomatic investment in Ukraine cannot be questioned and will be the foundation of his presidential legacy. But uncertainty over the West's long-term commitment is perennially stubborn. Each fueled by shifting political current on both sides of the Atlantic that must worry Zelensky. In the United States, Trump, who disdains Ukraine, lionized Putin and cares little for Europe's security given its endless attacks on NATO, may be less than 5 months from winning back the presidency. Big gains by far-right parties in European Parliament elections last weekend, especially in powerhouse France and Germany, could create future complications for European Union support for Ukraine, and Putin's willingness to throw thousands of Russian thousands throw thousands of Russian lives into the meat grinder of the front line without suffering any political effect back home. In the nation verged of a political opponent means the possibility always remains that the white tire of the conflict before he does. But the flurry of a new initiative from the US and its allies looks like an attempt to Trump-proof Ukraine's western lifeline and to bring Kiev closer to Western economic and defense structures should Biden and Wolverine G7 leaders who formed the first wave of its support after the Russian invasion get swept away. But no US president can truly bind his successor to the course of action, and the torturous delays in squeezing the latest $60 billion US aid package for Kiev through Congress underscore that America's fractious politics means that future US large largesse cannot be guaranteed even if Biden wins in November. The flurry of new Western plans to help Ukraine. Still, the latest Western plans to help Ukraine send a strong message of intent. Biden's return to Europe Wednesday, only 3 days after he left, encapsulated his role as the most proactive leader of the Western alliance since President George H.W. Bush. The time on the president's calendar is a reliable barometer of the White House priorities and is closely watched by both the U.S. allies and adversaries. As he left for Italy, the administration unveiled new sanctions on more than 300 individuals and entities designed to paralyze the parallel economy, which includes plentiful Chinese channels that the Kremlin has constructed to evade the previous U.S. punishment. The sanctions target foreign financial films, aiding Putin's war effort to restrict Russian access to some U.S. software and information technology. Russia today has become a war economy. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said, unveiling measures designed to raise the cost of the conflict. Every day, Russia continues to mortgage its future to sustain its unjust war of choice against Ukraine. Biden and Zelensky are expected to sign a bilateral security pact that committed the U.S. to train Ukraine's armed forces for 10 years and to expand the cooperation in the production of armament and equipment. We want to demonstrate that the U.S. supports the people of the Ukraine, that we stand with them, and that we will continue to address their security needs, not just tomorrow, but out into the future. Jake Sullivan, Biden's national security advisor, told the reporters on Air Force One. Still, the executive agreement would not be hard for Trump to break if he wins power. US officials are also optimistic that the G7 summit, which groups the US, France, Britain, Germany, Japan, Italy, and Canada, will sign off a month of negotiations on the $50 billion economic support package to finance the repair of Ukrainian infrastructure to be financed by the interest of frozen Russian assets. These measures are expected to be bolstered by the new NATO package to be unveiled at the Alliance Summit in Washington later this summer that would institutionalize military support for Ukraine. The move would still, however, fall well short of Zelensky's elusive wish for the clear timetable for entry into the Western Alliance. Russian advances on the battlefield. These are substantial and credible political, economic, and political demonstrations of support for Ukraine, but they come at a vulnerable time for the country with its survival far from assured. The latest battlefield assessment released by the Hudson Institute, for instance, cite the worrisome trend of incremental gains on multiple battlefronts, including in eastern, and northeastern Ukraine. Relentless Russian attacks on civilian infrastructure have destroyed half of Kiev's electricity production capacity, the report found, underscoring why already in mid-June there are mounting concerns about the plight of Ukrainian civilians in the coming winter, with Russia expected to double down on past efforts to use the annual chill as the weapon. Russia's success in rebuilding a military machine that was shockingly devastated on the road to Kiev 2 years ago has led some senior European officials to warn of the mounting threat to Europe's territorial integrity. Wider tensions between the US and Russia are meanwhile being highlighted by the arrival of the convoy of Russian ships in Cuba that has Cold War overtones. Retired General Wesley Clark, the former Supreme Allied Commander of Europe, warned in the Houston Institute briefing this month that it will be wrong to underestimate the potential of the Russian military following the mockery in the West that greeted the decimation of the Kremlin expeditionary force and its poor leadership and tactics earlier in the war. The Russian forces is structured around the grinding forward, regardless of losses, grinding forward through the bad command decisions. Clark said, "Don't underestimate them. Technically, they are pretty smart. They've got China behind them. They've got Iran and sanctions bolstering behind them." Ukraine's heroic resistance to the Russian invasion in early 2022 was the inspirational moment, but the blue and yellow flags that only seems to be flying everywhere in Western cities have become ragged and faded more than 2 years later. An inspiring war turns into a bitter slog. The extraordinary moment of instability in developed world politics has forced many foreign leaders to prioritize their own problems, even while seeking to sustain support for Kiev. The new war following the Hamas terror attacks on Israel shifted attention away from the conflict in Ukraine, which simultaneously evoked the carnage of the trench warfare of World War I and the frightening new era of warfare with swarming drones delivering death to troops in the foxholes. At times, an annoyed tone has crept into some of the exhausted Zelensky's interactions with the West. The Ukrainian leader made no secret of his frustration at the time it took to deliver the latest US aid package, the delay for which Biden apologized when he met with Zelensky at the D-Day event. He has also expressed impatience that world leaders have not taken up his invitation to the summit in Switzerland after the G7 designed to unite the world behind his vision of how the eventual peace deal to end the war could shape up. Biden, who is taking repeated days off from the campaign trail to travel to Europe, will not attend. Vice President Kamala Harris will be there instead alongside Sullivan. Not surprisingly, Zelensky has always chafed at the self-imposed limit of Western support for his war effort, that the symptom of Biden's core aim of avoiding the direct NATO confrontation with Russia. The US president critics have long accused him of only offering Kiev the means to avoid losing the war, but declining to provide the wherewithal to win it. Biden has, however, recently allowed the use of limited categories of U.S. weapons in limited circumstances in Ukrainian operations on Russian soil. John Kirby, the White House National Security Council spokesman, insisted that Biden is determined to take bold steps to show Mr. Putin that time is not on his side and that he cannot outlast us as we support Ukraine's fight for freedom. But there's a rising tide of political tension, high stakes elections, and ideological estrangement between globalists and isolationists in Western societies and Russian leaders who ruthlessly refused to change course whatever the cost. So, however long the world lasts, the West will never escape questions about its staying power.